Right, let's wait for our friends to.
Can you post the link in the live chat, the other one?
No. Oh, you can. Great. Fantastic. Hello, friends. We are waiting for friends to connect and find. Okay, great. Geeta just joined us. And is everything okay with the audio, Geeta? If you can confirm, that would be okay. It works. Great. Wonderful. All right, so we'll wait a few seconds so that everyone else can figure out the new connection. And in the meanwhile, I'll put the link of the sutta. Technology is also in samsara. All right. And the link for the sutta is in the live chat again, so everything should be okay. All right. Okay. Should we start?
Yeah, let's do it. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. So good morning again, friends. And today we'll be looking at Majjhima Nikaya number 6, the Akankheyyasutta, which is translated here as "if one wishes." So as usual, I will read through the sutta and periodically give explanations. And at the end, we can have some questions and answers and some discussion. And if there's any more technical issues, please let us know as we go along and we'll try to sort them out. So the sutta begins. Thus have I heard, on one occasion the Blessed One was living at Savatthi at Jeta's Grove in Anathapindika's park. The Blessed One addressed the monks. Monks, auspicious sir, those monks replied to the Blessed One. The Blessed One said this, monks, live with virtue, with adherence to the Patimokkha, live with restraint in accordance with the Patimokkha, with good behavior, seeing danger in even small errors. Train yourselves in the training rules. So this little opening paragraph, this appears in a handful of places in the canon. So it's just a general exhortation. It's aimed particularly at the monks to encourage them to follow the monastic rules and to try to avoid making even small errors, small mistakes, not to do even slight unwholesome things. This is reminiscent of the line from the Karaniya Metta Sutta where it says, not doing even minor things that wise people would criticize. So this, he's emphasizing here the importance of virtue, the importance of carefully observing and restraining our conduct. For those who are not monastics, then the emphasis is on following the precepts and on trying to embody the Noble Eightfold Path as much as possible. So then the Buddha starts with the series on if one wishes, and this takes up the bulk of the sutta. So I'll go ahead and start going through this. And it's in the form of a progression, by the way, starting with the simplest, least lofty wishes, all the way up to the most lofty. So it says, monks, if a monk wishes, may I be loved, appreciated, respected, and honored by my fellow spiritual practitioners. Then he should be completely virtuous, be devoted to internal mental serenity, not neglect jhana, be committed to insight, and live in an empty dwelling. So this is the first statement. So if you want to be loved, appreciated, respected, and honored by your fellow spiritual practitioners, which is a fairly common wish. So most people want their spiritual companions, their fellow practitioners, to like them, to appreciate them, to respect them. Pretty common. Most people have this wish, this aspiration. And the Buddha says, well, then the solution is to be virtuous. So to be sincerely committed to living a virtuous life, a moral life, a life which is built upon a sincere respect for other people, a life which is built upon the genuine wish to cause no harm to any living being and to bring as much goodness to the world as possible. So the essence of virtue is compassion. So virtuous conduct is all about compassion. It's not about it's about not wishing to harm either yourself or others. It's about wishing to benefit yourself and others. So virtue ultimately is compassion. It's the expression of compassion. So one should be completely virtuous, be devoted to internal mental serenity. So in Pali, that's ceto samatam anuyutto. So samatha, many people know the word samatha as meaning peacefulness. Ceto means mind. It's related to the word chitta. So ceto samatha is mental tranquility, mental peacefulness. Anuyutta means to be committed to or devoted to. So to be devoted to mental peacefulness. So trying to keep the mind peaceful at all times. Not letting the mind get agitated or upset or disturbed or angry. Not letting the mind wander all over the place. Trying to keep the mind peaceful at all times, under all circumstances. And it's, again, important to note that this comes right after the comment on virtue. So as I mentioned, virtue is all about compassion, the essence of compassion. So starting from a place of very strong compassion, manifesting through body, speech, and mind, then there's the statement to be committed to mental peacefulness. So this is important because some people, they try to just go directly to mental peacefulness. But since there's not that pre-existing foundation in virtue and compassion, then mental peacefulness becomes apathy and indifference. It becomes this self-centered, uncaring attitude, which is peaceful to a certain extent, but it's lacking the warmth, the selfless caring of compassion, which comes up through practicing virtue. That's a very important element. So internal mental serenity, so mental peacefulness, peacefulness of mind, keeping the mind peaceful at all times. So again, a peaceful mind doesn't mean that when you see someone suffering, you're just like, it's all good. It means that with a peaceful mind, you go and help them. Having a peaceful mind doesn't mean that when you hear about an atrocity on the news, that you're just like, so sorry, I'm not bothered. And still, you're like, with a peaceful mind, you say, this is BS. This is not appropriate. This stuff needs to stop. But with a peaceful mind, you say these things. So, for example, a friend of ours recently pointed out that people who openly condemn racism get accused of being not spiritual enough. But that's actually exactly the opposite. The people who are not condemning racism are the ones who are not spiritual enough. Those are those who are cultivating, maybe they're cultivating mental peacefulness, but they totally skipped the compassion step. So just peacefully watching as other people suffer is not Buddhism. It's not the Buddha's teachings at all. Peacefully saying nothing as others are oppressed is not Buddhism. It's not what the Buddha spoke about at all. So it's really important to note here, as all throughout the suttas, the Buddha starts by emphasizing virtue, compassion, caring about others as well as about yourself, actively doing things to not harm others and actively doing things to benefit others. This is the theme which runs through the entire Pali Canon. Then the next category is to not neglect jhana. So once again, as we mentioned last night, the Buddha also emphasizes jhana practice all throughout the suttas. The importance of cultivating this deep, strong, unified, steady, alert state of mind. This very powerful samadhi. So samadhi means unification or collection of mind, collectedness of mind. So he emphasizes here, don't neglect jhana. If you want your fellow practitioners to like you and appreciate you and respect you, well, be completely virtuous, which means cultivating compassion, not just as a mental state, but as an activity of caring about others, an activity of doing things for others. Maintain a peaceful mind at all times, so not giving in to agitation, disturbance, anger, and so on. If anger arises, then of course we need to acknowledge its presence, but we don't let it disturb us and we don't let it control us. So keeping a peaceful mind at all times, and don't neglect jhana. This is an interesting one. Like, you want your fellow practitioners to like you, then practice jhana. I find this really interesting that the Buddha includes this. So jhana is a very important element of our practice in that it gives our mind the strength and focus and durability to cultivate deep, strong insight, to clearly see and break through our defilements. So jhana is a very important part of our practice. But it also tends to make us very happy, very tranquil, very hard to upset, hard to disturb. It makes the mind very stable, which then also can make you a much more likable person. And the next one, he says to be committed to insight. So in the Pali, this is vipassana. Another odd thing that I sometimes hear people say is that the Buddha never used the word vipassana in the suttas, or that he uses it rarely. I don't know why people say this. The word vipassana is all over the suttas. And vipassana, briefly speaking, it means seeing distinctly. So it's usually translated as insight or seeing with insight. So understanding in a deep, clear, distinct way the nature of reality. So to be committed to insight, be committed to the development of this deep, clear, precise understanding of the nature of reality. So vipassana, be committed to developing vipassana. So vipassana doesn't just refer to some meditation techniques, but rather it refers to the state of mind of clearly seeing everything we encounter as impermanent, unsatisfactory, and impersonal. Clearly seeing emptiness in all things. Note once again that this comes after the cultivation of compassion through virtuous action, mental peacefulness, samadhi, jhana. Then there's the statement of being committed to cultivating insight. And finally, he says, live in an empty dwelling. So empty dwelling is a very literal translation of the term sunyagara. Sunyagara literally means empty house or empty dwelling place, empty building. And this has a few meanings. So first off is on the more literal side, an empty dwelling is a place where there's nobody else living. So you're alone, you're in solitude, you're peaceful, you're in seclusion. So there's great value to this, especially with meditation practice. If you're meditating by yourself, you're less likely to be disturbed by the activities of other beings. It's very helpful for cultivating self-reflection, looking deeply at one's own mind. There's also the implication here of celibacy. So in the suttas, living alone is usually used as a euphemism to refer to celibacy. So saying like, oh, he lives alone means he's celibate. He's not interested in sexual relationships. Another meaning of empty dwelling is not having a lot of possessions. Again, in the literal sense, like you go in your room and there's not a lot of stuff in there. Like I go in my room and there's some extra robes and some toothpaste and things, but there's really not much else. So that brings, first of all, it brings a sense of spaciousness and peacefulness to the mind. By contrast, so my grandmother, when I don't know what her house is like these days because I haven't been in it in many years, but at least used to be that when you walked in her house, there were these narrow corridors between piles and piles of junk. These narrow corridors, there were like boxes piled to the ceiling, filled with just random stuff that she'd been hoarding for decades. There were these narrow little corridors that you could walk through, these narrow, dusty, because everything was dusty, because of course you can't properly clean when your house is packed full of random junk. These narrow, dusty corridors between piles of junk. And every now and then we would suggest to her, we'd be like, Grandma, maybe we could help you clean this up a bit, maybe clear out some stuff. And she'd be like, no, we can't do that. Then she would open a box and she'd pull something out and she'd be like, do you see this? Do you see this? And it's this like little crayon drawing. And she'd be like, this drawing was made by your uncle when he was 5 years old. We can't get rid of it. And it would be like this, like every one of these things, it would just be some old useless bit of junk, but which she couldn't possibly let go of it because she was terribly attached to it. So I don't mean to bash on my grandmother. She's a wonderful person, and I love her a lot. But this is an example of the polar opposite of what the Buddha is recommending. So instead, cultivating the state of mind of being willing to let go of anything that's unnecessary. And then when we go and we look at our stuff, we realize that most of it's unnecessary. We don't actually need most of it. So you shed your excess things and you realize that the mind becomes spacious and peaceful. Also, there's less things to distract you. If you walk in your room and the television's on and you've got your PlayStation and you've got a bunch of novels and you've got this and you've got that and you've got random knickknacks and you've got all kinds of stuff to distract you, then it's easy to just get wrapped up in your distractions. Also, the moment you walk in your room, all that stuff is going to start producing mental activities. Your mind is going to start thinking and responding and reacting to all of that stimuli. So having a very simple, Spartan dwelling place naturally conduces to peacefulness of mind. It supports the development of serenity and insight. And a final meaning of living in an empty dwelling is this is a metaphor which refers to jhana. It's a metaphor which refers to the peacefulness of samadhi. Because in samadhi, the mind is completely clear. So that's living in an empty dwelling. So we inhabit the mind, and most people, their mind is cluttered. It's full of a bunch of random junk all the time, like my grandma's house, full of a bunch of random junk. But as we cultivate samadhi, we start clearing out the junk from our mind until it becomes open, spacious, clear. So then we're dwelling in an empty mind. A mind which is fully capable of doing whatever we need to do with it. So empty mind does not mean non-functional mind. Empty mind means actually a fully capable mind. A mind which is capable of anything because it's not cluttered with anything. So that's the metaphorical meaning of living in an empty dwelling. So if we cultivate these things, compassionate, virtuous action, mental peacefulness at all times, trying to develop jhana. If you don't have jhana yet, that's okay. Just keep trying. The Buddha doesn't say you must have jhana, but he says don't neglect it. Don't give up on it. Keep putting forth the effort. Be committed to insight and live in an empty dwelling. So if we do these things, then our fellow spiritual practitioners will recognize our sincerity. Will recognize that we're sincerely, deeply committed to living a genuine spiritual life. They'll recognize the value of our practice. They'll recognize that we are trying really hard And since we're also being nice, all of those things together mean that they will like us, appreciate us, and respect us. Then the next one, he says, monks, if a monk wishes, may I acquire robes, food, dwellings, and medicine? Then he should be completely virtuous, be devoted to internal mental serenity, not neglect jhana, be committed to insight, and live in an empty dwelling. So this is wanting to get stuff. And in particular, it's wanting to get the 4 basic things that we need in order to survive. So we all need clothes, food, somewhere to live, and medicinal supplies to deal with our illnesses and afflictions. So this is not necessarily about greed so much as it is about wanting to make sure we get our basic needs. But there can also be a greed element here, as there is with the previous one. So wanting to be liked by others, that can just be a function of greed. But wanting to be liked by your fellow spiritual practitioners is also important, because if they like you, then they will help you in your practice. Here also, wanting to get robes, food, dwellings, and medicine, that could be a function of greed, wanting to have nice food, wanting to have nice clothes, and so on. But it's also something practical. We need robes, we need food, we need somewhere to live, and sometimes we need medicine. These are things which support our practice. They support our spiritual life. So it's not necessarily just about greed, but also about recognizing that these are things we need to get by. And so again, he gives the same recommendations. So to be virtuous, peaceful, practice jhana, practice insight, and live in an empty dwelling. And again, because if we do those things, 1, people will recognize our sincerity and want to support us. They'll want to make sure we have what we need to keep going in the spiritual life. Also, this accumulates virtue. It accumulates merit. It accumulates good karma, which naturally returns to us in the form of getting what we need. So sincere spiritual practice itself is meritorious. So it comes back to us. So if you want to get more nice things, well, be a good person, practice virtue, keep your mind peaceful, try to get jhana, see the world through wisdom eyes, and live a simple, pure life. And what you need will come to you. Next, he says, monks, if a monk wishes, when I use those robes, food, dwellings, and medicine, may it be very fruitful and beneficial for the donors. Then he should be completely virtuous, be devoted to internal mental serenity, not neglect jhana, be committed to insight, and live in an empty dwelling. So this is referring to the workings of karma. So in I believe it's the Dakkanavibhanga Sutta, the Buddha states that to give a gift to an ordinary immoral person, the karma returns to you 100-fold. But if you give a gift to a virtuous spiritual practitioner, then the karma returns to you 1,000-fold. So setting aside the numbers, because the numbers are beside the point, what the Buddha is pointing to here is that if we support virtuous spiritual practitioners, then that produces much stronger merit, much more powerful good karma than giving to ordinary immoral people, ordinary people who don't have a spiritual practice or who are not committed to virtue. So there's this wish. It's like, well, when people make donations to me, when they give things to me, I want them to get lots of good karma. I want them to experience the supportive merit of their good deeds. Well, in that case, we need to make ourselves a field of merit. We need to make ourselves as virtuous and spiritual as possible, so that the gifts given to us produce a lot of good karma for the giver. So this also is an interesting one, because there's this compassionate aspect here. Again, it's not just a greedy wish. It's like, oh, I want people who support me to get a lot of good karma from the act of supporting me. Well, in that case, we should be very sincere about our practice to make sure that the benefactors get a lot of good karma. And again, it's the same thing. Be virtuous, cultivate mental peacefulness, practice jhana, see the world with wisdom, and live a simple life. Then the next one, it says, monks, if a monk wishes, when my deceased family members and relatives remember me with a clear mind, may it be very fruitful and beneficial for them. Then he should be completely virtuous, be devoted to internal mental serenity, not neglect jhana, be committed to insight, and live in an empty dwelling. This is referring to when there's a common practice in Buddhist cultures, and this is mentioned in the suttas, a common practice of when you have deceased relatives, then you do good things and you dedicate the merit to your deceased relatives. And the idea here is that your deceased relatives will be aware of the good things that you're doing and rejoice in it, delight in it. And that rejoicing in your good karma produces good karma for them as well. So it's a way of supporting our deceased relatives. It's a way of helping them generate good karma and maintain an affinity with Buddhism, even in their next life, wherever they are now. So the Buddha is saying, if you want this to be effective, then you've got to have a strong spiritual practice. You've got to be very compassionate. You've got to be very moral. You've got to have a peaceful mind. You've got to be making an effort to develop jhana. You've got to be seeing the world with wisdom and living a simple life. If you do this, then when your relatives direct their minds towards you, then they'll see a virtuous spiritual practitioner. They'll see a holy person. And that will be of great benefit to them. Then the next one, it says, monks, if a monk wishes, may I overcome discontent and preference. May discontent not overcome me, and may I continue defeating discontent whenever it arises. Then he should be completely virtuous, be devoted to internal mental serenity, not neglect jhana, be committed to insight, and live in an empty dwelling. So this is the wish to start to tame one's defilements, to start to get one's defilements under control. So we start to recognize that we're prone to discontent and preference. Well, interestingly enough, it's the same practice. Cultivate virtue, cultivate a peaceful mind, try to get jhana, see the world with wisdom, and live a simple life. And this will help you let go of discontent and overcome your preferences. The next one, similarly, is monks, if a monk wishes, may I overcome fear and terror. May fear and terror not overcome me, and may I continue defeating fear and terror whenever they arise. Then he should be completely virtuous, be devoted to internal mental serenity, not neglect jhana, be committed to insight, and live in an empty dwelling. So similarly, if we practice sincerely in these 5 modes, then we will not be afraid. We will have nothing to fear. There will be no terror in us. The world will not seem frightful or disturbing to us anymore. So part of this is because when we're virtuous, we know that we're generating only wholesome karma, so that we will get only wholesome results from the choices we make. Since we're cultivating a peaceful mind, a stable mind, then we know that we won't fall into reactive tendencies. We won't fall into our reactive tendency of fear or aversion. And when we see the world with insight, then we also recognize that there's nothing to be afraid of in the first place. And if we live a simple life, then we don't need to be afraid of losing anything because we don't have anything to lose. Next, it says, monks, if a monk wishes, may I easily gain the 4 jhanas, aspects of the higher mind, which are pleasant abidings here and now, without trouble or difficulty. Then he should be completely virtuous, devoted to internal mental serenity, not neglect jhana, committed to insight, and live in an empty dwelling. So again, these are all things which support the development of jhana. So compassion, virtue, keeping your mind peaceful all day long. Of course, you have to try to attain jhana. That's kind of an important part of attaining jhana, is trying to. Be committed to insight. So the development of wisdom supports the practice of samadhi. It supports the practice of jhana. One of Bhanteji's favorite sutta quotes that he quotes all the time is, there is no jhana for one who lacks wisdom. And there is no wisdom for one who lacks jhana. But one who has both jhana and wisdom is close to enlightenment. So that's emphasizing the relationship between jhana and wisdom. And how when we cultivate wisdom, it's easier to get jhana. When we cultivate jhana, it's easier to get wisdom. They go together. Next, monks, if a monk wishes, may I live having personally contacted those peaceful, non-physical liberations which transcend physicality. Then he should be completely virtuous, be devoted to internal mental serenity, not neglect jhana, be committed to insight, and live in an empty dwelling. So this is the wish to attain the formless states of mind, the non-physical states of mind. So these are the perception of infinite consciousness, the perception of infinite space, the perception of nothingness, and the perception of neither perception nor non-perception. So these four states of mind in which there is no experience of physicality at all. It's purely an experience of mind. So in these states of mind, your body disappears entirely, and the entire physical world disappears. There's no experience whatsoever of anything physical. So while these are not necessary for attaining enlightenment, they are spoken of in a few places in the suttas as being extremely peaceful states of mind, which can be developed through cultivating jhana. Next, it says, monks, if a monk wishes, with the complete elimination of 3 fetters, may I be a stream enterer, one who is not capable of downfall, one who will certainly reach complete awakening. Then he should be completely virtuous, devoted to internal mental serenity, not neglect jhana, be committed to insight, and live in an empty dwelling. So once again, if you want to attain stream entry, the first stage of enlightenment, same thing. Compassion, virtue, mental peacefulness, practice jhana, develop insight, live a simple life. And that's the basis for becoming a stream enterer. Next, if a monk wishes, with the complete elimination of 3 fetters and the attenuation of lust and hatred, may I be a once returner, one who will return just once to this world and reach the end of suffering. Then he should be completely virtuous, devoted to internal mental serenity, not neglect jhana, be committed to insight, and live in an empty dwelling. This is wishing to attain the second stage of awakening, that of a once returner, someone who will only return to human life once more before attaining enlightenment. It's the same practice. Are you starting to see the pattern in the sutta? Next, if a monk wishes, with the complete elimination of the 5 lower fetters, may I be a celestial being, there to attain enlightenment without returning from that world. Then he should be completely virtuous, devoted to internal mental serenity, not neglect jhana, committed to insight, and live in an empty dwelling. So this is wishing to attain the third stage of enlightenment, that of a non-returner. Someone who will never return to human existence and will attain enlightenment as a deva. Next, if a monk wishes, may I manifest various kinds of psychic powers. Having been one, may I be many. Having been many, may I be one. May I appear and disappear. May I move unobstructed through walls, fences, and mountains as if it was space. May I dive in and out of the earth as if it was water. May I move across water without sinking as if it was earth. May I move cross-legged through the sky like a bird. With my hand, may I touch and hold the sun and moon, so powerful and majestic. May I personally extend my authority as far as the Brahma world. Then you should be completely virtuous, devoted to internal mental serenity, not neglect jhana, be committed to insight, and live in an empty dwelling. In other words, if you want psychic powers, this is also the way to do it. So basically, you're starting to figure it out. no matter what your spiritual goals are within Buddhism, it's pretty much the same path. Compassion, virtue, mental peacefulness, cultivate jhana, cultivate wisdom, live a simple life. Not that complicated. Next, if a monk wishes, with the divine ear element, which is purified and transcends human hearing, may I hear both kinds of sounds, celestial and human, far and near. Then you should be completely virtuous, devoted to internal mental serenity, not neglect jhana, be committed to insight, and live in an empty dwelling. So this is if you want to be able to listen to devas, to angels and spirits, and also if you want to be able to hear things from far away, same thing. So this is another form of psychic power, the ability to hear things beyond the domain of ordinary human hearing. Next, if a monk wishes, using my own mind, may I know the minds of other beings and other individuals. May I know a lustful mind as a lustful mind, or a lust-free mind as a lust-free mind. May I know a hate-filled mind as a hate-filled mind, or a hate-free mind as a hate-free mind. May I know a delusional mind as a delusional mind, or a delusion-free mind as a delusion-free mind. May I know a contracted mind as a contracted mind, or a scattered mind as a scattered mind. May I know an expanded mind as an expanded mind, or an unexpanded mind as an unexpanded mind. May I know a surpassable mind as a surpassable mind, or an unsurpassable mind as an unsurpassable mind. May I know a concentrated mind as a concentrated mind, or an unconcentrated mind as an unconcentrated mind. May I know a liberated mind as a liberated mind, or a non-liberated mind as a non-liberated mind. Then, he should be completely virtuous, be devoted to internal mental serenity, not neglect jhana, be committed to insight, and live in an empty dwelling. In other words, if you want to be able to read other people's minds, same practice. Next, if a monk wishes, may I remember numerous past lives. 1 life, 2 lives, 3 lives, 100 lives, 100,000 lives, many eons of universal expansion, many eons of universal contraction, many eons of universal expansion and contraction. At that place, I had this name, this family, this appearance, this food, this experience of pleasure and pain, this death. Falling from there, I appeared over there, where I had that name, that family, that appearance, that food, that experience of pleasure and pain, that death. Falling from there, I appeared here. In this way, may I remember numerous past lives and their characteristics in detail. Then he should be completely virtuous, be devoted to internal mental serenity, not neglect jhana, be committed to insight, and live in an empty dwelling. In other words, if you want to remember your past lives, same practice. Next, if a monk wishes, with divine vision, which is purified and transcends human vision, may I see beings falling and appearing, inferior and superior, beautiful and ugly, in good places and bad places. May I understand how beings fare according to their actions. These honorable beings engaged in physical, verbal, and mental misconduct. They disparaged noble beings, they held wrong view, and they based their actions on wrong view. When they were separated from their bodies after death, they appeared in deprivation, a bad destination, downfall, in hell. However, these honorable beings engaged in good physical, verbal, and mental conduct. They did not disparage noble beings, they held right view, and they based their actions on right view. When they were separated from their bodies after death, they appeared in a good destination, a heavenly world. In this way, with divine vision, which is pure and surpasses human vision, may I see beings falling and appearing, inferior and superior, beautiful and ugly, in good places and bad places. May I understand how beings fare according to their actions. Then you should be completely virtuous, devoted to internal mental serenity, not neglect jhana, be committed to insight, and live in an empty dwelling. So this is wanting to have a direct awareness of karma and rebirth, wanting to directly know the functioning of karma, wanting to be able to directly perceive rebirth operating, seeing how people go from one life to another based upon the choices that they make in each life. So if you want to have that ability, the ability to directly know karma and rebirth, same practice. And finally, if a monk wishes, with the elimination of the corruptions, may I here and now reach and dwell in the corruption-free mental liberation, liberation by wisdom, having personally realized it with higher knowledge. Then he should be completely virtuous, be devoted to internal mental serenity, not neglect jhana, be committed to insight, and live in an empty dwelling. So this is if you want to attain full enlightenment. Same practice. Doesn't change. Cultivate compassion, virtue. Have a peaceful mind at all times. Practice jhana. Cultivate insight, and live a simple life. And you can attain enlightenment. And so then the Buddha concludes, monks, live with virtue with adherence to the patimokkha, live with restraint in accordance with the patimokkha, with good behavior, seeing danger in even small errors, train yourselves in the training rules. This is what was said, and this is what it refers to. This is what the Blessed One said. Satisfied, those monks delighted in the Blessed One's speech. So I find this very interesting. Because what he's emphasizing here is that he's not just talking about memorizing the Vinaya and following a specific set of rules, but rather he's talking in a much broader sense about cultivating virtue, cultivating a peaceful mind, practicing samadhi, practicing jhana, seeing the world with wisdom, living a simple life. So it's not necessarily just following a laundry list of arbitrary rules, but rather it's about cultivating the spiritual path, sila, samadhi, and panya. So the three trainings of morality, concentration, and wisdom. And with that, we can get any goal that we have in our spiritual life, from the simplest to the highest. So that's all I have to say on this sutta. I've always personally really loved this sutta. So I know I say that virtually every Sutra study class, so I don't know if anybody believes me anymore. But I've always loved this one. So at this time, if you have any questions or comments, please go ahead and type them in the live chat, and we'll talk about it some more.
Thank you, Bhante. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And thank you, friends, for being patient this morning and finding the link and joining us for Sutta study. So Gita is asking, Bhante, how does one avoid the formless states of abiding?
Avoid them?
And develop only the jhanas?
You know, I've never met anybody who had a problem with like accidentally cultivating the formless states. Usually people talk about how hard it is and how it's really, really difficult. I mean, most people, they have a hard time even getting into first jhana, let alone the formless abodes. So, and on the rare occasion when I met someone who thought they were in the formless abodes, a little bit of questioning revealed that they actually were just spacing out and weren't actually getting even remotely close to the formless abodes. So honestly, I don't think that that's the right question to be asking. I don't think the right question is, how do I avoid the formless abodes? I think the right question rather is, how do I enter jhana and use it as a vehicle for cultivating insight? I think that's a better question to ask.
Thank you. Marielle says, not exactly the topic, but this reminded me that the more I'm able to identify the delusions in me, it becomes easier to identify others people's delusions.
Yeah, that's true. The more we advance in our own practice, the easier it is to see where others are maybe not doing so well. And then we can see what we can do to help. We can see what we can do in order to help others along the path.
And Tran is asking, how should one balance giving to temples to support virtuous monks and nuns versus social services organizations to support ordinary people who may not live virtuously?
That's up to you to decide. Yeah, I mean, it's really up to you. There's no clear answer on this one. But I would say not to neglect social services, not to neglect charity programs for ordinary people. So this is an error that Buddhists sometimes make, is thinking, well, if I get the most virtue, If I get the most merit from giving to virtuous monastics, then I'll just only give to virtuous monastics, and the poor people can just suffer and starve and forget them. But that's actually not the right attitude, because then we're not cultivating compassion. In fact, that indicates a serious lack of compassion. So I would say do both. Of course, support the monasteries. Monasteries are very important. They're very valuable. They bring a lot of good to the world. But also support charities. Support the organizations that help out the underprivileged, the disadvantaged, those who have a hard time just getting food to eat. It's very important. And sometimes you can find monasteries which have programs like that already. And then you can actually do both at once. Support the monasteries' food distribution programs. And then you get the joy of both supporting the monastery and supporting charity at the same time. Okay?
Thank you. And Yanni is asking, Bhante, you just said my question that I have in mind. How to cultivate the jhanas?
Okay. I'll talk more about it this evening as well with Samma Samadhi.
Yes, at 7:30 p.m. there will be one talk dedicated only to that. And Ishan says, thank you, Bhante. So can it be said that jhanas are states / milestones of progress on the path? Also, please help. How can I increase my sitting times?
So jhana are milestones in the development of samadhi, but they're not necessarily milestones in development upon the whole path, because the whole path has many factors and components to it. So one useful list that I like to reflect on from time to time is the 7 factors of awakening. So the 7 factors of awakening, one of them is samadhi. That's true. But there's 6 others. So how are we doing with all 7 of those? Also, sila, samadhi, and panya. It's only 3, but still, how are we doing with all 3? So you might have very good samadhi. You might even be getting into 4th jhana. But if your morality is weak and your wisdom is weak, then your progress on the path is actually not doing so great. And it's time to try to build up those other 2 pillars of the practice. Okay?
Great, thank you. And Geeta is asking, Bhante, is it possible to study a sutra on the 7 factors of awakening?
Yeah. Haven't we done so?
Don't
Or
remember
did
if
we
we
just
did a
have a
sutta. I think
regular
we had a
talk
talk.
Yeah, I'll make a note of it. Yeah.
Great. And that was the last question, unless something pops up right now. Oh, actually, there's something on Facebook. Let me see. Wang is asking, once I was meditating, I lost cognitive sort, like passing out, and only noticed after regaining consciousness. Only noticed I passed out. What meditative is that? Is that 4th jhana?
No, that's called falling asleep. That's not good. So in jhana, the mind is extremely awake and alert. The most awake you've ever been. It's not even remotely like sleeping or passing out. So realistically, you probably just passed out or fell asleep, which doesn't have anything to do with samadhi. It doesn't have anything to do with jhana. Sorry.
And actually, thank you, Jim, for pointing that out. That Ishan also had asked, please help. How can I increase my sitting times?
Oh, yes. Well, ultimately, it comes down to determination more than anything. When you sit down to meditate, determine not to get up until the timer goes off. And then set the timer for a few minutes longer than you normally sit. And don't get up until that timer goes off. And then gradually, over a period of time, over the course of several weeks, gradually increase your sitting time. Optimally, in my opinion, it's good to be able to sit for an hour without moving. But if you currently sit for 10 minutes, then you can't go directly from 10 minutes to an hour. That would be way too much. but you add a few minutes every week, and over the course of a few weeks, you'll get there. Or a few months even is fine. But gradually building up, and each time making that firm resolution, I will not get up until the timer goes off. Makes a huge difference. Other really important things are your posture. If your meditation posture is very good, then it's easy to sit for long periods of time. If your posture is bad, then it's very difficult to sit for long periods of time. And finally, ultimately, it comes down to your equanimity. If your equanimity is strong, you can sit for long periods of time. If your equanimity is weak, you cannot sit for long periods of time. Okay?
Oh, and big shout out to Tin and Zen watching from Australia. Our friends, they were saying good day from Australia.
Hello, happy to hear that you're joining in.
Wonderful. Yeah, very good to see you. All right. So I think that's all for this morning. Thank you so much, Bhante, for sharing this beautiful sutta with us. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And we'll be meeting again this evening with Bhante to talk a little bit more about the jhanas. Actually, a lot more, not a little bit more. So see you in less than 12 hours. And as usual, have a great